Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. This is our 2025 season, week 4 podcast. This is your Tuesday podcast of the off week. Welcome back. And hello, Bulldog Nation. I'm sure all of us are still riding high and feeling really great about another exciting win over the Tennessee Volunteers. This one probably the most exciting in recent memory. The last time we saw a finish that came down to the wire was actually the last time we lost in this series, which was back in the 2016 season on the Hail Mary. And I'm sure you heard all about that. We're still just working on some observations, and we're going to start getting into some of the details and stats a little bit from the Tennessee game and take a look at how our people did, what we thought about it, what our expectations were, and kind of measure against that. We're still looking back, too, at some of the predictions and thinking that we had coming into it for both Georgia and Tennessee and what came out of that. And then we'll start breaking down a little bit more. I mean, little bit by little bit, we'll start looking ahead to Alabama. But I think for this week, we're mostly going to focus on what do we see about Georgia? What do we see going on in the national media? What's going on out there? I've also been working on a revamping. I keep promising that I will post in the written section of thedailydawg.com on a written post where you can see the games that matter this season, those teams that we're comparing ourselves to for the national championship and the playoff push. And that's been changing some. We started off with 9 teams. Now, we'll get back to that in a little bit. But basically, if you remember when I talked about it before, I said there's 9 teams at that point that I was looking at and saying these are not just teams that are in the top 10 or the top 25 or top 15, but these are also teams that I feel like have a legitimate chance to get not only in the playoff, but actually advance to the playoff and be a factor in the national championship. Well, the perspective on that has changed now. 2 of those teams have bailed out. So we're not looking at the same 9 teams anymore. So that kind of changes things a little bit. And you say, okay, well, who's that? Well, number 1, Clemson is out of there. We're no longer considering them. And Notre Dame. Both of those teams now have 2 losses. And we're going to save this for a full podcast on this, but just as a quick perspective, both of those teams have 2 losses, which by no means, I think, eliminates them from the national championship playoff hunt discussion, but it certainly makes it nearly impossible. And not nearly impossible. It certainly makes it very difficult. And at a minimum, they're going to have to play their way back in. And so right now, there's no reason to keep them in the conversation. We're no longer looking at them as teams that are likely to make the playoff and could make a run. Right now, they would just have to put on a heroic effort to get back into the playoff discussion. So we're not going to lose sight of them entirely, but we're taking those teams' remaining games off of our list of the 31 games that we started with and, that are going to matter. They've already played some of those games and they still count, the ones that we were counting. But, and honestly, Notre Dame only had 2 games. That's part of what their problem is. We only had them down for the Miami game and the Texas A&M game because those were the only 2 games that were on their schedule that looked like other teams that were, potential playoff or highly ranked teams or teams that are likely to finish in the top 25. So the rest of their schedule, even if they win out, doesn't give you much. I mean, they can go 10-0 from here and finish 10-2 and be one of those 2 lost teams we were talking about. But that's not going to give you a lot to look at because you're going to look at the rest of their schedule and say, well, wait a minute, what do I get from that? They lost to the only 2 really decent teams they played, or the only 2 top 25 teams or other potential playoff teams they played. So what do I think about that? So we'll get into that later, but just saying that is something we're working on, and it's part of the perspective that we want to have here as we go on the season. But let's get back right now to just being more celebratory about what happened this Saturday. And I just continue to be amused, and I'll tell you one level of amusement that I enjoyed. I realized I was, even as I was putting together my show notes for yesterday and today, this happens every time you play, and this is one of the terrible things when you play Tennessee and you lose, is that stupid Rocky Top song. And I say it's a stupid song. It's actually a good song, okay? But anyway, that song that they have co-opted into their brand gets infected in your head. You can't get out of your head. And so when they win, that's terrible because you walk away from a game in which you played this rival team and they beat you, and then you're still singing their fight song. It's like a double whammy. It's like they've poisoned you and beaten you. So brainwash you and then put you back out there. So, but I found that, and this is really funny, my music stream, for some reason this morning, as I was listening to music and putting together show notes, my music stream, for some reason on Apple Music, threw in literally somebody, I don't know, it could have been a Dolly Parton or somebody's rendition of, I didn't look to see who the artist was. It was not Dolly, I don't think, but somebody's rendition of Rocky Top, not the Tennessee band version. And I think in other times, I might have just clicked through that and be like, nope, we're not listening to that. But as a result of what happened on Saturday and how I feel about having notched that 9th win in a row and just completely owning this series and the history of it right now, I just sang along with it. Hey, good old Rocky Top. Rocky Top, Rocky Top was good to me. Rocky Top was good for you guys too, I think. So I think we can feel really good about that right now. So let's go back. So we're still celebrating. We're looking at the thing. At this game, we're breaking down the stats a little bit and we're thinking about it. So one of the things that we need to cover and celebrate is our players who were celebrated. So guess what? For the first time this year, we got on the radar again. So we're always interested in how what happened on the field translates into how does the local media, the SEC media, and the national media see us. Well, guess what? The SEC has chosen Gunnar Stockton as Offensive Player of the Week. And he's the only one. Sometimes they pick more than one if they feel like people should stand out. So they highlighted that Gunnar, making his first career start, had 304 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, while also carrying the ball 13 times for 38 yards. That's 38 net yards, by the way. He gained 48, but he also did get sacked for a 10-yard loss. So he gained 48 yards while running the ball. So if you thought it felt a little better watching it than 38, he did gain 48 yards, but he did lose 10 yards on a sack. And the way college football stats work, I think the pro stats, I have to go back and check this, but I think pro stats, they actually keep the sack yardage out of the run totals and keep them different. But in college stats, the quarterback runs for 100 yards, but then gets sacked 3 times for 10 yards each and loses 30 yards, then he's considered to have run for a net 70 yards. So there's some logic in that, but it doesn't always tell the full story. And I think it's worth noting that he gained 48 yards. So, I mean, he had gashed while throwing for over 300 yards. He also gashed them for nearly 50 yards, and he scored a touchdown rushing the ball. So in the end, I think we mentioned this yesterday, but he had more than 300. He had more than 340 yards of total offense running and passing, and accounted for 3 touchdowns, 2 passing and 1 running. So that's a fantastic effort by Gunnar. And recognized by the SEC as Offensive Player of the Week. Let me see what else they said about him. They just noted that he, after the ball scored on the first possession, he promptly drove the Bulldogs 75 yards in 6 plays, 2 minutes and 32 seconds to tie the score at 7-all with a rushing touchdown. They said that he cut the deficit to 21-14 early in the second period with a 36-yard pass to Zachariah Branch. And they noted his 4th and 6 pass from the Tennessee 28 for a 28-yard touchdown to London Humphreys in the corner of the end zone. And they give him credit, or they note that the Bulldogs all totaled gained 502 yards of offense and went 5 for 5 in the red zone. So congratulations to Gunnar Stockton, SEC Offensive Player of the Week. Hopefully this will not be the only time we say that this year. Also, we have to point out that we also got accolades for Peyton Woodring, who was the Special Teams Player of the Week. And they pointed out that he not just made, I like this, they say he drilled all 3 of his field goals, went 3 for 3, and got all of his PATs, which he did. No flaws, no problems there with the PAT. Cut the deficit to 4 points before halftime with a 20-yard boot. I don't know that was the most notable one to pull out. They pointed out that he put Georgia up 27-21 near the end of the third period with a 48-yard field goal, which, again, how wonderful is it to go into a game like this and when you do settle for a field goal? I mean, I remember being disappointed that we were settling for the field goal. I remember trying to think, as if I was coaching, do I go for it here? What was the circumstance? I don't remember the exact down and distance and everything. We'll get to that later. But I do remember thinking about it. And what I was going to say about that is I know that whenever I think about, okay, well, we should take the field goal, anything that's a 40-something yard field goal, I don't consider. Even if I was thinking from the coaching point of view and I'm evaluating what Kirby's thinking, I don't even consider the idea that he's not going to make it. Now, again, yes, guys are going to miss. I mean, he might miss, although he didn't last year. Last year, Peyton's field goal misses, the only misses he had all year were a couple tries outside of over 50 yards. And you have to understand when you put a guy out there for a 50-plus yarder, you're just hoping, right? Like, well, and most of the time, hopefully as a coach, you're looking at the situation. You've gotten a situation where you basically have nothing to lose, right? Like, okay, we're going to go for the 56-yard field goal here because there's 2 seconds on the clock and it's halftime. And why not? I mean, we could go for the Hail Mary, but when you got a kicker as good as Woodring, a 56-yarder is probably a 50-50. He can kick it that far, right? And so it's just a matter of, can he get it there on target? And I would say it's 50-50, maybe 40-60, 60-40, okay? Whereas a Hail Marys are probably 1 in 20, right? 1 in 10 at best. So statistically speaking, it's going to be, excuse me, I had an itch on the back of the head there. For those of you watching on the video, whenever I get the video podcast going, and just as a word, I have been recording the last 2 or 3 podcast, and I do intend to get this onto a new YouTube channel with the video podcast, so you guys can watch along for all the excitement that it is to watch me sit here and talk about the same thing you're listening to. But I hope you do enjoy that, and I will be trying to bring that along. I'm working on the details and getting it all ironed out, but hopefully this will be available and you'll get to see it on video, maybe even today or tomorrow. Hopefully I'll be able to get it to them. Anyway, back to the point. The point is as a fan and thinking along with the coach, and as a coach, I'm sure it means a ton to know that you've got a guy that you just basically think is automatic inside 48 yards, right? So, and I certainly thought that. It never dawned on me about him missing the 48-yard field goal. So, and then it points out that he had another 24-yard field goal. So I was just reading through the SEC notes that they put out about how Peyton Woodring was the special teams player of the week. And it's also worth noting, by the way, and I think this is really important, and it's something that's easy to miss in the game, but we had 8 kickoffs, and all 8 kickoffs were touchbacks. Tennessee never had a chance to advance the ball, and that may seem like a small thing, but let's remember that in the playoff game against Notre Dame back in the winter, we had been ahead early in the game, but not by much because we were not able to score touchdowns and settling for field goals. And Gunner got the Kirby made the choice to be aggressive and give Bobo and Gunner everybody permission to go for a downfield play late in the half to see if we could get some points and get ahead at the half, or get a bigger lead at the half. And especially knowing that we were not going to get the ball to start the second half, I think that made a lot of sense, and I understand why they were doing that. It ended up, as we all know, in a strip sack, which led to Notre Dame getting the ball just outside the 10, and then on the next play, they threw whatever it was, 11, 13-yard touchdown. That was their only offensive touchdown of the game, and so the offensive drive only covered the 11, 12, 13 yards, the one play, because we gave them the ball right there. And but then, so even at that point, the game is perfectly within reach, right? You're 13-6 or 7 or whatever the score was at that point. And I apologize for not having that down. But the point being is that then we kick off the ball to start the second half, and Notre Dame runs the kickoff back. And yeah, you don't think that's going to happen. That hasn't happened to us in forever. Our special teams is usually top notch. But in a game that's nip and tuck back and forth, like the game was on Saturday with Tennessee, like the game was with Notre Dame, like the game was with Georgia Tech, like the game was with Texas. And here's a trend, right? So here's another observation and thing and I've mentioned this on yesterday, but this is something we want to keep an eye on and think about. And really, I think it just speaks to what we've been talking about, that we are still easily, by anybody's measure, the first, second, third, fifth, somewhere in there, most talented team in college football. But at the same time, we don't have the same level of depth in our talent and as much overall talent as we did in 2021 and 2022. And I keep saying it, but I don't think you're going to see that again anymore. And college football has changed. So with that being the case, how you perform in these tight moments is going to make more of a difference, because we're going to end up playing, when we play the better teams, you're going to have a lot closer, tighter games. You were able to get used to, and this is kind of what I was talking about, it almost created for me a malaise or a boredom when I'd wake up on the morning of Saturday of the Tennessee game the last couple of years, because we were just so much more talented than them. Even though they were a top 25 team and a team that might make the playoff, each of the last 4 or 5 years, we've been so much more talented than them that if we don't screw it up, we should win. And if we play well, if we really execute, we should win convincingly. And that's what had happened. Like I keep saying, average score of the Tennessee 8-game winning streak coming into this game last Saturday, 38-13. So we had been winning convincingly because we were coaching well, playing well, executing well, and we just simply out-talented them by a large majority. We are still a significantly more talented team than Tennessee, as I mentioned coming into this game. Even though Josh Heupel has raised their recruiting, and even though they are, looking at maybe a number 8, number 7, top 10 class right now, the difference in their class and our class, I think they even have I think we have 2 5-stars on the hook right now for our next upcoming class for next year. And I think they do as well. But we have something like 20 4-stars. And if you look at the ratings of those 4-stars, they are people who are generally in the top 150 players in the country. Tennessee has 13 4-stars under commitment, and they tend to range from that top 100, 150 down into the top 300. So even though they are improving their talent base compared to where they were when Heupel took over and they were just at the bottom or outside the top 25 in recruiting, they've moved up into that top 10. They're getting that way. Well, the gap between Georgia at the number 1, 2, or 3 position and Tennessee at the 7, 8, or 10 position is still, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 4-star players, and maybe those 4-star players are even 20%, 30%, 40% higher rated 4-stars overall. And you say, well, that's in any one season, that's not a big deal, but that's happening every year. And so every time you look at your team then, which is composed of 4 or 5 recruiting classes, and at the moment, I want to acknowledge I am just ignoring portal discussion and transfers, right? It's still hard to say how analysts are dealing with that. There are ratings and people trying to analyze, and you're seeing ratings come out each year now and who had the number 1 portal or transfer class, who's the number 1, who's the number 30, the top 50 prospects in the portal and in the transfer season. That kind of information is starting to come together, but the reliability of that compared to the decades of data that we've built on recruiting is just not quite there yet. So for the moment, I am going to acknowledge when we talk about teams and we're breaking them down, I'm going to talk about and acknowledge portals and transfers as part of it. And we certainly have to acknowledge that, right? I mean, look at what we did on Saturday. You had Zachariah Branch as a transfer. So obviously he has made a huge impact on this team, okay? His athleticism, where you can get him a screen pass and he can rip off a touchdown from anywhere on the field, that is a dynamic weapon. And it makes those screen passes that we've all been complaining and moaning about a lot more dangerous, right? It forces the defense to think about getting wide out there and make sure, hey, we've got to have enough guys out there, because if you get just 1 or 2 guys out there and they get blocked, then Zachariah Branch is gone. It's a touchdown. Doesn't matter where on the field it was. It could be a 75-yard touchdown, a 50-yard touchdown, a 35-yard touchdown. So far, we've seen a 47 and a 36-yard touchdown on a 5-yard screen pass that turned into a breakaway touchdown for Branch. In 2 games, he's done it twice. And the only reason those are 47 and 36 yarders is because that's how much field was left. Had it been from our own 25, I think the result would have been the same, and it would have been a 75-yard touchdown. So that makes that dangerous. That's changing our whole offense to have Zachariah Branch out there, okay? And London Humphreys. London Humphreys is a guy who scored a touchdown against us as a Vanderbilt player 3 years ago, transferred last year, and we expected a lot from. And, of course, our whole receiving corps was a little bit disappointing last year, and London didn't make as much of an impact. He made an impact, but not as much an impact as I might have hoped. I saw him stepping into that Ladd McConkey role, although he's different. He's bigger, he's taller, but he does have speed. And he looks like he's a really good route runner. So that's why I saw him comparing at least somewhat to the Ladd McConkey role. But he, he's making an impact now. He had a fumble in the game against Austin Peay. That was disappointing to see, but obviously he had a nice touchdown in the end zone in either the Marshall or the Austin Peay game. And he's had a couple nice possession receptions. And then obviously the reception for the 4th down play. Not only was it a beautiful pass, but he couldn't have done a better job of creating the position where he had enough room where he basically backed the defensive back out. He kept his back in position where the defensive back was walled off from the sideline, and he left himself enough space in the end zone and sideline, to give Gunner a window to drop that ball into, which he dropped it in there perfectly. And he watched it in from over his shoulder while, guarding against that defensive back being able to make a play on it and stop him. And so it was perfect. And so that's a great combination effort. It's not, I want to take nothing away from Gunner. It was a beautiful pass. Perfect. But that is also part of the route that London Humphreys run. And you see it all the time when guys go to that pylon, that corner, they end up with the ball and the defensive back and themselves as the receiver, all ending up basically at the corner of the pylon with about a foot of square space for all of them to intersect. And so London Humphreys made sure that he backed out in his route to keep the defensive back out so that he had 5 or 6 yards of space to adjust, get under the ball, catch it, and be fully in bounds. And it was a thing of a beauty. So London Humphreys making impact. Here's a guy who transferred from Vanderbilt. So my point being is, look, guys that made impact on the team, guys that we're watching as key players at Georgia, weren't just guys that we recruited initially. They're guys that we brought in on the transfer. So transfers matter. I'm not saying transfers don't, but going back to my core point was, look, Tennessee is recruiting at a higher level, but every team is made up of 4 or 5 years primarily of the kids that you recruited and brought in. And if Georgia is 20% better each year in terms of their recruiting, okay, as far as the number of four stars, 5 stars, how highly rated they are. And again, not every star pans out, but just saying, look, if all things being equal, we start with these number of recruits and a certain percentage of them pan out, and we have this many of them and you have that many of them, and they pan out at about the same rate, then if we had more, then we'll get more out of it than you got, right? Makes sense. So again, recruiting, not really a science that you can pinpoint statistically, but generally speaking, you see the team accumulating the talent. Georgia's accumulating a little more talent each year. And then you look at a team that's composed of 4 or 5 seasons of accumulated talent. That's what you put out on the field with your 85 to 100 and something players that they have out there, or on the sideline or on the field or on the squad somewhere practicing. Well, then Georgia ends up roughly with, if they're 5 players better each year, let's say, then at a 4-year period, then maybe they have 20 more impact players than Tennessee, even though Tennessee is a top 10 team. So we made this concept last week. We talked that out. I'm just refreshing that and saying, look, we're still a more talented team than Tennessee, but we don't have the depth. We're not able to hold on to just a backlog of all these players like we talked about. Neither is Tennessee, neither is anybody in the country right now. And so while we're more talented, that gap is smaller. And so good coaching, good execution, playing at home, a lot of different things conspire to help make Tennessee, to make these games where it's not just, okay, this team is so much more talented, the other team has no chance. These games are competitive. So this was exciting. This was a fun game. We talked about it. I woke up on Saturday, feeling like we should win, but I didn't feel like the likely scenario was that we would win by 3 touchdowns. And I have felt that most of the last 4. I mean, if you asked me, or you had been a part of it, we'd been doing this podcast 3 years ago, Tennessee game, I would have told you. And I'm pretty sure I did. Some of you who are friends and people that I was connecting with back then would tell you if they remember. I said, I think we win this game by 3 touchdowns. I mean, I'm not that nervous about it. So I was nervous about this game, which made it so much more exciting. And it did come down to the wire. And so anyway, let's just get back to digging back into the stats and the numbers a little bit. But so we stopped to celebrate. Special teams honor goes to Peyton Woodring. Oh, well, point is, and this rabbit trailed way off that. What I was trying to say was, look, don't sleep on the fact that Peyton Woodring also made sure that every kickoff went through the end zone and they were touchbacks. So we never had to deal with a run back because in a game this close, and that's the point. So the games are close, talent gap's not as much, but now you're playing closer games because the talent gap is not as much. And we expected and we talked about that we thought Georgia would win this game, but it would be close. Vegas thought it was close. Vegas thought the score would be low. All the experts thought the same thing. We were all wrong about the score being low, but we were all right that it was a close game and that anybody could have won it. And in a game that anybody can win, you have to do the little things. And so, And again, it's reasonable to look at Peyton Woodring and give him off a special teams player of the week. He made all of his field goals, and the poor kid from Tennessee didn't, right? And so famously, I was someplace out yesterday, and I heard some guys talking next to me. They were having lunch, and they were talking about the kid missing the field goal. And I kind of jumped in the conversation a little bit because I couldn't avoid it, because I was trying not to interject myself. They were just having their lunch, and I was working at my computer next to them, waiting on somebody. And they were talking about it, and I couldn't help it because, they were theorizing, or they were talking about the kick, and they were thinking that the kick was shorter than one that, or was, no, not shorter, longer. I guess they were thinking, well, it was a really short kick anyway, so he should have made it. It's amazing that he missed. And I said, so I think they were thinking it was more like a 20-something, 30-yarder. They didn't remember. It was a 43-yard kick that he missed at the end of the game, the Tennessee kicker. And he had made a 48-yarder just a little bit before that to go up 38-30. And so he clearly, it was well within his range. He has the leg for that. But obviously he missed the big kick in the big moment. And we did also have a run back. We had a 28-yard kick return. Zachariah Branch brought one back out. I don't think it led to a big deal. It didn't flip the field or change anything. But I'm just saying, going back to the Notre Dame game last year, a game that was, well, 1-score game became a 2-score game when we kicked the ball off in the second half and the guys ran it back. And so the little things matter, special teams matter, and we really executed at a high level on all that. We made all of our field goals. Every kick was a touchback. We actually ran one back and got a little extra yardage. I think Branch got 28 yards on the kickback. That's not much. It's only 3 yards more, but he didn't make, having chosen to run it back. How many times do you see a guy make the choice to run one back and only gets to the 16? So you think to yourself, well, what was the value of that? You could have just taken the touchback and been at the 25. You thought you'd do something, and you actually cost your team. Now you're deeper in the hole. Saw a game, I think it was in the Oklahoma Temple game. I saw a highlight where there was a kickoff. Oklahoma scored, which they did a lot in the Oklahoma Temple game last weekend. They scored a lot, and I think the Temple guy called for the fair catch, but stepped on the sideline while catching it. So instead of being out at the 25, he pinned his team at the 1. And again, it's like, why are you even catching that ball? I mean, you're catching the ball at the 1 at the corner, right next to the sideline. You just get out of the way. That ball might land out of bounds, and you get the penalty, and you get the ball at the 35. Either way, it's going to be a touchback. So again, these little mental errors can make a big difference. And we've seen that happen against us a bunch, and it almost never happens to us. And so, again, kudos to Peyton Woodring. Without his being automatic, I think it would have, he allowed Kirby to make the right choice at times to take the field goal, especially, I'll say one that I think was really important. And I talked to some people on text and chat during the game about this. When we, in the first half, when we had the 88-yard drive, and it was the 17-play 88-yard drive, we settled for the field goal, and that made the game 21-17 as we're getting to the half. And is a 6-minute drive, 14 plays, 88 yards. You're down basically at the 1 yard line, and you end up kicking the chip shot field goal. I know the temptation there would be to go for the touchdown. We're down. Tennessee's punched us in the mouth. Let's punch back. Kirby did the right thing, and it would be hard not to feel like you want to go for that. But you're down. You're on the road. You need to stay in striking distance. You need to keep giving yourself options. Your team has put together a hell of a drive, 14 play, 88 yards, 6 minutes and 15 seconds. You possess the ball. You've given your defense time to rest. You've given your defensive coaches time to adjust and think about what they can be doing differently to make sure that we're on top of what Tennessee is doing to us. You have done an excellent job, and you're already down a score. So if you don't get points there, if you man up and get big and you say we're going for it, and then you don't get the touchdown, and you juice up Tennessee, they get the ball, maybe you could stuff them at the goal line. I mean, a lot of times when your defense is just crushing it, I'm maybe just as happy to pin them at that 1 yard line and say, look, go for it. We're probably going to score from your mistakes here. There was nothing to show that we were stopping Tennessee regularly yet, and that we would largely, be effective. I mean, there's just as good a chance they're going to rear back from the end zone and throw a 93-yard jump ball that they win the jump ball, right? How many times do we see that on Saturday? And it's a gut kick touchdown. So you go from being, down just 4 points if you kick the field goal. You go for the touchdown, you don't get it. If they end up scoring on a quick strike or anywhere on that drive and they get a touchdown, well, now you're down 28-14 at the half. And you just got a huge hole to climb out of, right? Now you've got it's demoralizing. So I think you did the right thing there. For those of you who are wondering, there were times where I feel like, and I talked about this yesterday, I feel like the play calling after we took the lead in the third quarter and we got the ball twice, and we settled for 1 field goal out of 2 possessions. I think the play calling there was too conservative, too much run. We fell in love with the idea that we were ramming it down their throats on the first drive out of the second half. And I think we kept trying to do that, and Tennessee adjusted, and we put ourselves in 3rd and long, and we weren't able to get anywhere. And so we ended up only getting 1 field goal when we had the ball twice. If you score, and I talked about this yesterday, you score 2 touchdowns there. And I know you're saying, well, you can't count on that. No, I can't count on that, but you had the ball twice and in really nice field position. So you didn't even have full drive. So you had the ball twice, and if you do what you did on the last drive, which is drive down the field and put the ball in the end zone, and yes, we did it on 13 run plays out of a 14 play drive, and I know that we'd love to do that again. If we could have done that again, you're right. I mean, the game would have been over. Okay. You go down, you score 2 touchdowns on long running drives. You eat the rest of the clock. You're going to give the ball back. You're going to be up now 17 points on Tennessee at the end of these 2 drives. And, Tennessee is going to have, maybe a little over a quarter left to play. So you maybe do turn this into another, 3-scored rout. And that was possible. That was within reach for Georgia. All they had to do was execute on the drive. So, and again, it's not, when we blame Bobo or Kirby, if he told Bobo to go conservative, we have to realize that, look, all those plays are practiced and designed to work. Okay, there's no reason, if we executed correctly, and we saw that on the previous run drive, if you execute correctly and hit your blocks, then we've got the athletes, we've got the blockers. You should be able to march down the field and score those points. Well, we didn't. We had the ball twice, already up 3 points. We're up 24-21. So you're up 3. You get the ball the first time, you score a touchdown, now you're up 10. You get another touchdown, you're up 17. Game is effectively over. Even if Tennessee mounts a comeback and scores, they've got to score 3 times with a quarter and a half to go. And so instead, we kept the game in reach because we only scored 1 field goal in those 2 possessions. So we're only up 6. And you saw what happened when Tennessee did get it going again. They scored a touchdown and so all of our work to take the lead and then tack on a little bit with that little field goal, well, it wasn't even 7 or 8 points, right? So Tennessee took the lead right back as soon as they scored. And they scored again on another long bomb touchdown, right? That's what happened to us when they took the lead. So, but again, there's a couple points there. So let's sum it up. What are the points involved in that? Number 1, yes, I feel like the play calling was too conservative, but let's acknowledge that we can't just blame Bobo or Kirby for being conservative there. It had worked on the previous drive. There is something to the idea of saying, I'm going to call it until you prove you stop it. So I think the third drive, I really do pin on the play calling. The second one, I acknowledge okay, they didn't stop it on the drive before, so make them stop it. Well, they did. And then so then the third time, I'm thinking you need to pull out some different plays. So I do blame them a little bit. But either way, the team, if they'd executed the same way they executed on the first drive out of the half, still should have earned that 17-point lead. So there was a lack of execution. There was a lack of play calling. It's a team effort, coaches and team, everybody combined, okay? And I think that, but that being said, we continued to execute at a high level in little places all across the game. So no punt returns. There's listed 1 punt return for 12 yards. But if you remember, that 1 punt, I don't even know if they intended to return it. I don't remember if he signaled for a catch, but that was the one that was fumbled on the catch, and the ball bounced and kicked around forward, and then they ended up landing on it and they retained possession, and it ended up 12 yards forward of where it was first touched. So they were credited with a 12-yard punt return, but they didn't actually catch the ball and move forward 12 yards. They almost lost the ball. We had a 50-50 chance of getting that ball back on the muff and didn't. So Thorson was great. He pinned them back on their side of the field. He averaged almost 48 yards a punt with a net of nearly nothing except for that one return. Woodring made all his field goals when the other team didn't, and that made all the difference in winning the game. And Woodring didn't miss any extra points, and every kickoff was a touchback. So we weren't threatened at all by a run back or return that could have changed the game in a tight game like that. And that's the point. These tight games. And apparently we're going to see these tight games. Are we good enough to make the playoff? Yeah. Do you think that we weren't as good or better a team than Notre Dame last year, even though we lost? No. I mean, we had we were injured. We never had the continuity. It just wasn't the team that we expected it to be last year for a lot of reasons. We've been talking about that. Gunner was in his first start. There's a lot of things going on. Offense was not geared or suited towards him. So they called, I think, a limited playbook, and effectively the defense did their job against Notre Dame in that game. I mean, Notre Dame had no yards, and we gave them their one offensive touchdown, and we gave them their only other touchdown on a kick return. So everything broke Notre Dame's way. But that's the point. It was a close, tight game, and Notre Dame was a talented team. I don't think they were as good a team as us. They featured good running, good defense, not much on offense. And had we been able to muster anything on offense, their defense didn't outplay ours, but their special teams did, and our offense did give them the ball in a turnover. If you go back to the 2023 season, where we didn't make the playoff, where we didn't make the the 4-team playoff, Alabama got that slot because they beat us in the SEC championship game. Even though we were, again, considered as good as Alabama is, people thought Georgia is a better team. We had been 12-0 on the season. We make it to the SEC championship game. We've been number 1 the whole season. We get there and we lose to Alabama, and it's a close, tight game. We lose 27-24. And what was the difference? We fumbled the ball in our own territory. Okay. And Alabama, we stuffed them. They didn't get a touchdown. We held them, but they kicked the field goal. Well, what was the difference in that game? Well, they won by 3. So in this era where you're not going to be able just to not only out-coach and out-execute, but out-talent people substantially, or in a game against Alabama, and going back to that 2023 SEC championship game, I'm not saying we completely outclassed them. I think we were the better team, but we didn't completely outclass them because Alabama has a high level of talent, right? So you knew that was going to be a 50-50 game, or a game that could go either way. Could we have blown them out? Sure. Could they have blown us out? Yes. In those realm of possibility, those things could have happened. But we're just looking at this era now, and we're saying this is what's going to happen when we play other teams that are legitimate playoff contenders, SEC contenders. Like the Texas game, like we managed to blow Texas out at Texas last year, but everything went our way in that game. Statistically, we didn't have 300 yards of offense. We ran the ball well, but not even for 200 yards. A lot of that was because it was a short field. We were able to get some turnovers from them. We got some sacks. We were able to just swarm them defensively in the first half, and then build off of that defensive performance with a pounding run game from short field that put the ball in the end zone, and we built the lead, okay? And then we held on to it. And so we ended up beating them pretty convincingly. In the championship game, SEC championship game, we were trailing. Then we had to come back, and we managed to tie the game up and take it to overtime and then win in overtime. So, close game. Georgia Tech, close game, 8 overtimes. Okay. So now here we are again, first big test of this year. What do we got? Another overtime game. So this is my point. This is the future. But one of the things you can be excited about as a Georgia fan is we continue to execute at a high level, and Kirby is recruited and pays attention to the details. We have excellent punting. We have excellent special teams. We have excellent field goal kicking. All of that came to matter in this game. Without those things, just the slightest drop down in that, Tennessee generally was good. They had 6 of 7 kickoffs that were touchbacks. They missed 1 field goal. So, but that cost them the game, right? So, all right, let's move on. So we talked about that Gunner, offensive player of the game, of the week in the SEC. We're not surprised that Woodring could get that honor. He's been an excellent kicker and Mr. Automatic. And the point we were also making there was that he gives the coaches the confidence to take the 3 points. And especially in a game like Saturday, one of the observations I wanted to make was more often than not, taking the points probably was the smart move. I regret some of the play calling, especially on that third drive after the second half, when we had the lead, where even one of those two drives, if we get the touchdown instead of the field goal, we would have had a 10-point lead instead of a 3-point lead. And that might have really changed the way the game went. When we did give up that touchdown to Tennessee, we wouldn't have fallen behind. And then when we did come back and get another field goal, we were only up 2 points now, right? So in the end, it worked out. We were able to trade, and we ended up having to chase the game, get the 8 points, get the touchdown, the 2-point conversion. But had we been late in the game and holding a 2-point lead, that would have felt really dicey too, right? I mean, the 2-point lead is almost the worst thing you can imagine, because you just long for that point, because that point means at least if they line up for the game tying field goal on the last play. Again, by the time we end up at 38 all, they have the chance to have the ball last and win, and they missed it. But had we scored one more touchdown in one of those positions instead of the field goal, then, and I'm not doing the math to say it would have definitely ended up in that they could tie it or whatever. I'm just saying, you give us more points and chances are we're holding on to a lead, and maybe they're trying to tie it up. One of two things would have happened. Either they're going for a game tying field goal and we win if they miss it, or even if they make it, we go to overtime, which gave us the opportunity to play overtime. Or maybe since we would have had 4 more points and we ended up tied, I don't think it would have worked that way, by the way, because had we been in the lead, we probably don't go for the 2-point conversion at some point if we score the all things being equal. You get the idea. But long story short, if we had 4 more points on the board, chances are they're in the position where if we're still holding that lead and they get the ball last, then they have to go to the end zone, okay, to try to win the game, as opposed to being able to either tie it up on a field goal or win it on a field goal. We put ourselves in one of the more precarious situations. We put ourselves in a situation where they had the ball last 2 minutes and 32 seconds, and all they need is a field goal to win. And that is a result of not putting enough points on the board when we had the ball. We settled for too many field goals. So again, not all play calling, but I think there's play calling in that, but you got to go back and look at execution. So what did we do well? We did have 500 yards of offense. Okay. So overall, the offensive team played well. Tennessee, we don't know yet. So even after this game, we're not going to know. And we're going to have to look and see over the season what kind of defensive team Tennessee was. They did some things that impressed me. For periods of the game, they were able to do some things and take some things away from us. Especially, I think, if you look at when they were able to fight back and get the lead, and then we took the lead back, and then they got it back, and then they built on it. So fortunately, our defense was able, the last time they had the ball in regulation, before the last drive, the second to last drive they had, our defense did a good job of forcing them into a field goal when they were already up 35-30. Obviously, that ended up making all the difference too, right? And their defense had done the same thing. Their defense is to be credited for what they were able to do when we had all the momentum. They responded after we just pounded the ball down their throat coming out of the halftime. When the team did what Kirby said and go out and pound their ass in the second half, which he said on the radio broadcast coming out of halftime, when they did that, Tennessee responded. They got back up off the deck after losing the lead and being pounded on a run only drive, and they stuffed the run, and they're responsible for keeping us to those 3 points in those next 2 drives. And, credit to them. Now, on the big picture, their defense has fallen down to 105th in the country in points allowed at 29 points a game. Okay. And by yardage, they're now giving up 365 yards a game. They came into this game giving up about 290 something. And as a result of us putting up 500 and there only being 3 games, now they're averaging 365. That puts them at about 85th. These totals are a little off because when you look at these stats, again, 3-4 games into the season is hardly enough for the stats to normalize. So last year, 365 yards a game would have put you in the top 50 or so defensively. Right now, they're 85th. So, and that may, if they can hold at that level as the season goes on, we may see them as being one of the top 50 or maybe in the top 20 or 30 defenses. And they certainly had players that made plays. And it's worth noting too, and this is not to take away from Gunner or our offensive team, but it's worth noting that their top two cornerbacks were out for this game, and one of them is considered a surefire NFL prospect, and the other people think has NFL prospects. So they were playing at a deficit, and I think that's why you saw some of those penalties. I know, even listening to broadcast and watching the TV broadcast a couple times again, or parts of it again, I think one of the drives, the 14-play drive to take the lead, and the Fowler, I think, pointed out on the broadcast on ESPN, Chris Fowler, I think he particularly pointed out, this drive was aided at the beginning by penalties, but in the end, Georgia pounded them with runs. It was aided by penalties. I don't know if it was that one or not, actually, because I don't think we ever tried to throw. So it must have been a different drive. So I apologize. But there was a drive where we scored, and Fowler made the point that it was aided by penalties. It might have been the one where we tied it up and got it to 38 all. Either way, he noted it was aided by penalties. But those penalties, I know it wasn't the running drive, because those penalties were pass interference penalties and holding penalties that were significant. And they didn't just happen for no reason. I mean, they weren't lucky. They were guys that were younger and inexperienced, and our wide receivers and downfield players were forcing them to make the penalty. Okay. And so they were better off in most cases probably making those penalties, because if they didn't get called, then, hey, they would have stopped the play. And we've seen that. I've seen that happen before, where overall, let's talk about that for a second. Impression on the game. Overall, I wasn't thrilled with the officials, but I don't think the officials changed the game anyway. So I think they were okay. It seemed like they were a little ticky-tacky. There was a holding penalty. That was definitely a holding penalty against us, which I think negated our chance to score after we got the interception just before the half. We ended up with a holding penalty, and that pushed us back to where we only had, just a few seconds left, and now we're 20, 25 yards out of field goal range. We got within 10 or 15 yards of field goal range, but then we ended up going for the Hail Mary with Puglisi because there just wasn't enough time. So I wasn't thrilled with that. I mean, I think I see why they called it, but that penalty, had been, that amount of holding had been on every play and is on every play. They certainly could have called the push, what looked like a push off on the Tennessee receiver in the first touchdown, the second half. Brazel looks like he kind of pushed his hand on our guy and gets him out of the way and then steals the ball from him. But he didn't really throw our guy out of the way. He didn't create separation. And so I do think, and I mentioned that before, I think it probably was an okay non-call. And I'd rather see non-calls in that situation than calls. Tennessee clearly fouled. Their guys fouled several times when they were just beaten, and they had some young, inexperienced guys in the secondary. And, I think that's what happens when you have those guys. I think a couple of the calls against us similar looked ticky-tack, but it was probably pretty consistent. Also, as an observation real quick, I would just tell Ellis Robinson on that first touchdown, the big long touchdown that Tennessee got, the first one, my disappointment was he had already committed the pass interference. Then he falls down. Then the Tennessee receiver catches the ball and then just trots 20 yards in the end zone unharmed after that. Once you're fouling the guy, tackle him. I mean, literally the game could have been different if he had simply tackled him on that play. It would have been the same 15-yard personal foul or pass interference penalty that we were already going to get, but it's a 15-yard penalty, not a 70-yard touchdown, okay? So in that instance, he was late, he got there late, and then he runs into him. He was trying to recover and play defense, but he'd already fouled him, and it's just like, go ahead in that situation and be aware and take the guy. You just tackle him. Just tackle him. I mean, don't hurt him. Don't get ejected from the game doing something stupid or causing injury. That's not what I'm talking about. But go ahead and tackle the guy so he doesn't make the play. In college, you have the advantage. It's just a 15-yard penalty, and maybe Tennessee doesn't score or only gets a field goal on that drive instead of the immediate touchdown. So another observation, I mentioned this before, and you could play shoulda, woulda, if, but all the time. But I think it's worth noting that Tennessee scored 6 of their they had 13 possessions. We had 13 possessions in regulation, just leaving overtime out of this. We scored on 7, And of course, so we scored more because we settled for more field goals than they did. They scored 6 times. 3 of their 6 were on busted plays long. I mean, 2 of them were 56 and 70 something yard touchdowns. One of them was a busted play that was only a 36 yard touchdown. And it was in the second half. It was their second touchdown in the second half. And on that play, they had gone quick. They had gotten a first down run, or I don't remember for sure, but they got a first down. They got up. They were on our side of the field. They got up quickly, snapped the ball, and immediately threw the ball. And there was confusion in the defense, and that guy was just wide open, and he caught it for the 36-yard touchdown. That one was Staley, I think, caught that one, and for them. And in that play, all of those plays, I guess what I was saying is that, especially the 2 long touchdowns that were just jump balls, when we had guys there and they could have done something about it and they didn't. And when you throw those balls up, they're 50-50 balls, and we lost the 50-50 on both of those. So had we won the 50-50 on both of those, I guess here's what I'm getting at, is they had 3 touchdowns that were just lightning strike, quick, long touchdowns. And if we prevent those plays, or they just miss on the throw, which happens sometimes, or anything goes differently, it would have changed the entire nature of the game. Those plays represented, 150, 160 yards of offense and 3 touchdowns. So if you take those back off the board, or let's say they only connected on one of them. So let's say you get 70 of those yards. So instead of getting 496 yards, let's say they had 396 yards, and you take 2 touchdowns back off the board. So instead of 38 points, they're back at, It's 24 points. And so you get to the end of regulation and it's 30, 38, 24. It's a whole different game. So that goes to that idea of game of inches. It could have just as easily. I'm not saying that's what should have happened. I'm not saying it was unfair or something was wrong, or I'm just saying that's how close these games can be to winning and losing. In the end, Tennessee lost by the smallest of margins, a missed field goal, and then, the overtime. But they could have just as easily not been in the position to win the game at all or be as close, because they might not have hit on those big hitters. And those big hitters represented 21 points of the 38 that they scored in regulation. So, and that's a difference we've seen in years gone by. In the previous games against Tennessee, except for the 75-yard touchdown on the first play of the game in Neyland Stadium 2 years ago, Tennessee has largely missed on the big hitters. And so when you go back and you look at the stats, that's what it looks like. They put up 290 something yards, 350 yards. They put up 17 points. They weren't that close. And so this game, a big difference was they hit on the big hitter. And we saw that right away on the second drive, right? They marched down the field pretty methodically on the first drive, although quickly. The second one, it's a boom. They hit the long hitter, and it just looked like it was going to get away from us. But like I said, credit to the defense and stepping in there and doing well. So a couple more points that we'll hit, some more observations. Offensively, I think I talked about this, a run game. I am thrilled. I made this point coming into the weekend. I already emphasized this yesterday. I'm going to say it again. I made the point that the big difference in last year's team and the previous 3 or 4 years was run defense and run offense. That if you gave us back our averages on run defense and gave us back our averages of run offense, then last year's team would have looked totally different. Okay? Just 30 or 50 yards on each side of the ball makes a net 100-yard a game difference. It makes a time of possession difference. It makes a ball control, game control difference. And in this game, we had 198 yards rushing. We fell just short of 200 yards. Now that includes the overtime, and all 25 yards, 25 yards in the overtime were on the ground. So we had about 170, 175 yards at the end of regulation rushing. And that's a solid total. I mean, if we can do that in most, if we could pencil in now, we're going to get 170 yards in all of our SEC games rushing, then we would feel really good about how those games are going to work out for us. Again, remember last year we averaged 124 yards a game for the season last year rushing on offense, and on defense we gave up 130 yards. Now we held Tennessee to 125, which it would have been great to hold them under 100, and till late in the game we were. Their last 2 drives featured a lot more runs. We had held them. They only had like 30 yards rushing in the first half, and we had really held their run game in check, which is part of how we were able to reestablish and get control back of the game in the middle section of the game. They were able to, we remember the big passes that got the 2 big touchdowns in the second half and got them back out in front, but they were able to set up that touchdown or the potential game-winning field goal. And we would have talked about this, would have been a totally different narrative about this game had the kid made the field goal for Tennessee, because what we would have talked about is how our defense was given the ball back, or it was given the field back with 2 minutes and 32 seconds to go. And all they had to do was make Tennessee punt the ball and get this game to overtime. And not only did they not do that, they largely allowed Tennessee to run the ball at us. They did not throw very much on that last drive. They mostly just ran the ball at us and they did that in part so they could eat the clock. So this is Heupel doing the opposite of what I've said his teams are designed to do, and that sometimes leads to his demise, is that they can score quick on these big plays, but they can't do power offense when they needed it. Well, they did need it, and they did it right. They took the 2 minutes and 32 seconds off the clock. They got themselves into a makeable field goal. Now, one could say they were too conservative because they left themselves with a 43-yarder. Now, as a 43-yarder, you might remember, because again, talking about execution, they had the false start penalty, which set them back 5 yards. We'll never know if that changed the kick. It had plenty of leg, and he had plenty of leg on a 48-yarder before. So I don't think he feels like, oh man, I got to really muscle up to kick a 43-yarder. The pressure maybe got to him, or he just missed it, because sometimes you just miss it. If you've ever played golf, or if you've ever kicked a ball, it's harder than you think. So that's why Pat McAfee does those contests on game day. But so it's harder than you think. So but he missed it, and it was wide right. Okay, it was the width of the goalposts out to the right, but with plenty of distance. So he just pushed it. I don't know that it was because he was trying to muscle up, because I think he feels confident he can hit from that distance he had with no problem. So I don't know that the 5 yards changed it that much, but instead of a 43-yarder, it would have been a 38-yarder. Okay. So it definitely sounds easier. Anything in the 30s. I mean, I probably wouldn't have even opened my eyes knowing it was a 30-something yarder. With a 40-something yarder, I'm thinking, well, maybe he misses it, and then he does. So, but they did, one thing, we had 5 penalties in the game, which was more. We'd been averaging 1 or 2, 3 a game in the first 2 games. So 5, we basically equaled our penalty output like on the season. So we were less disciplined than we had been, but Tennessee had 10 penalties in this game, and that was one of them, and it may have been a difference maker. A lot of those other penalties, like I said, were downfield holding and pass interference penalties because they had inexperienced cornerbacks. But what I want to say about that is our downfield players, our wide receivers, made them make those. Gunner put the ball out there downfield, and they were in a position where they were going to make plays, and that forced those defensive backs, rather than give up big plays, to go ahead and commit the penalties. And in most of the cases, if I was the Tennessee coach, I probably wasn't that upset with the penalties. Those guys were beaten. I mean, I might be upset that I got guys out there that can't play man on man against the Georgia receivers, but that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize is, hey, the Georgia receivers did a good job. Not only did we rack up over 300 yards passing, we had a couple touchdowns passing. We put 500 yards of offense up, but they were consistently, even on plays that you might not remember because they were just penalties that we picked up the yardage on the penalty. They consistently were dangerous downfield and forced Tennessee to make desperate choices like making the penalty. And I wish we had made a better desperate choice on Tennessee's first long touchdown and just tackle the guy. But they did, and they took those penalties, and they had to because we forced the effort. So we feel really good about the emergence of the wide receivers. Zachariah Branch is the weapon we thought he would be. Noah Thomas was targeted a couple times and was still not a big factor in this game, but Colby Young obviously had the 45-yarder to open the game, had some good blocks, had some other great plays. So Colby Young being back on the team as a tall. And look, he's not just a possession receiver, right? He went out and outraced the cornerback and won the foot race on the 45-yarder to open the game. So we're seeing guys that can be versatile. London Humphreys can be a big, versatile possession receiver. Colby Young can be a possession receiver. We're still waiting for Noah Thomas to emerge. Lucky had a couple key moments. Lawson Lucky had a couple key moments in this game. Oscar Delp, they missed some blocking, but they did some blocking. The offensive line obviously missed a bunch of blocks, but at times were dominant in the run blocks. And at times there were some of those plays where Gunner had good time, including the 4th and 6 play. I mean, that was a do or die play. I don't remember what Tennessee did on defense, but Gunner had the time to lay the ball out where he wanted. And that was a layered throw, by the way. I did see on the replay. I did not notice it in live time, but Zachariah Branch had undercut that route and was, when you go back and look at the replay of London catching the ball and jumping up and celebrating, he celebrates with Zachariah Branch right away because Zachariah Branch ran a route that brought him just outside the end zone, about 5 yards outside the end zone at the same basic position, just behind where London Humphreys caught the ball in the end zone. So, which wouldn't have been a touchdown if they'd gone to Branch, or it might have been if he was able to shake his guy and get in, but it certainly would have been a first down. It was 20-something yards downfield. So that was also a nice play call, by the way, while we're talking about play calls. There was a layered throw there, and Gunner probably had 2 options, and he chose the deeper route because he thought he could make it, and he did. So kudos to that. The defense, I thought we might get a little bit more into some details about the defense here, but I guess the main thing is going back to the drives. Today I thought I'd talk about the drives. I mentioned we scored on 7 of 13. They scored on 6 of 13. Obviously, where we turned the game around was after they had their most success, their 3rd touchdown. So they scored on their first 3 drives. Their 3rd touchdown was on a 12-play, 83-yard drive. It was the only drive they had that consumed more than over 3 minutes or more of clock. Okay. And so it was a 5-minute drive, 12 plays, 83 yards. You might remember the touchdown in the back of it was like a 15-yard pass over the middle. We were just beat, and they just beat us up and down the field on that drive. And I think that it was a real testimony. That's the point at which it started feeling a little bleak. So the good news is we responded by getting the ball and going back and scoring and making it a 21-14 game pretty quickly. So we were not long down the 2 scores. But that's a great response from the offense. But it's also important to note on defense that after we scored that touchdown and resurrected the game, that's when the next drives you see punt, 5 plays, 14 yards, a minute and 20 seconds off the clock, punt. This is Tennessee. The next drive after that, 5 plays, 25 yards, and a punt. They used 2 minutes and 22 seconds. Then we intercepted them before the half. Then after we scored the go-ahead touchdown for the first drive, when they got the ball for the first time, now trailing in the 3rd quarter, and the game is getting away from them. This is, again, the defense drops the hammer. 3 plays, minus 1 yard, 1 minute and 17 seconds consumed. So in that and then we had the interception right before the half. So they have and then we pick them off again. So their drives, after 3 touchdowns on the first 3 drives, their next 5 drives are punt, interception, punt, interception. And they gained a total of about 60, 70 yards during that time. 2 interceptions, 60 or 70 yards, about 5 minutes, a little over 6 or 7 minutes of clock time. Amazing job by the defense from that time. So we know that Tennessee obviously put up the yards and points the rest of the game. But a couple observations, again, I'm going back to. Number 1, 3 touchdowns on long, quick hitters. And they're basically 50-50 plays. And in years gone by, we stopped them. This time we didn't. That may be something that shows that this defense is not as good as previous defenses. But it may just be that this defense is less experienced and or learns from that, and we don't see that kind of mistake again. Also worth noting, while I questioned whether or not a transfer from App State was the guy who was going to do it, as I said yesterday, he was the guy who did it. He was the guy who cracked the nut for Josh Heupel against the Georgia defense. He was fantastic overall. And yes, he had a swoon in there, but we're going to give some credit to the Georgia defense. But then they got back on top of it, and they put themselves in position offensively to win the game again. And yet, after getting burned for a couple touchdowns, our defense did stop that last drive of theirs, second to last drive in regulation, and forced them to kick a field goal after we had turned the ball. That was after the strip sack of Gunner. If they get a touchdown there, there's no chance we win the game. But the defense forced them into the field goal from the short field, kept it at an 8-point game. We're able to tie and respond. Now, again, I think we'd all looked at this and we'd be just nothing but aching and groaning and complaining about what happened to our defense had the field goal gone through at the end, because we would have looked at how they drove the ball, mostly running down the field, got in field goal position and won and went away and used all the time. We said, wow, when we needed our defense to hold up down the stretch, they didn't do it. They gave up the yards and gave up the game-winning field goal. They gave up the clock. They weren't able to make them, make a do-or-die play earlier so that even if they scored, we at least got the ball back with a chance to respond. None of that would have happened. But the kid missed the field goal, and it's worth noting, look, they held them. They burned up all that time and energy. They went 14 plays, 50 yards on the drive, used 2 minutes and 29 seconds. But they left it as a 43-yarder. And just like the game against Ohio State in the playoffs a couple of years ago, the fact that that was a 50-yard field goal that the guy was trying, made all the difference. If it had been a 28-yarder, okay, in both circumstances, I think we lose both games. So when a kicker is given a chance of such magnitude, propel your team to the national championship game, Ohio State a few years ago, Tennessee beat your rival for the first time in 8 years on this kick. It would have been handier if that kick had been just a gimme. Okay. So I guess we got to give the defense some credit for holding up there. And then where I will give them credit is given another chance, yet another chance, when we went to overtime, defense in the overtime, they ran 4 plays for 1 yard. They gained exactly 1 yard and kicked a 42-yard field goal in overtime to take the 3-point lead. But that gave us, since we had won the toss, the chance to know all we got to do is score the touchdown and we end this thing. And that's what our offense did. And again, offensive line had been stoned for a while when we kept trying to run the ball down their throat and finish the game off. Gunner was able to take it to the air to get us back to a tied game, but the run game had kind of fallen away after that first drive of the second half. But the run game comes out, and on the first play, Nate Frazier, who had a pretty good game, turned himself into a good game officially by cracking off 21 yards on the first play. The offensive line and the tight ends, everybody gets the blocking. He gets to the edge. And once he was inside the 5, goal to go, I think we all knew it was just a matter of, that we're going to stuff this in there. It was a little closer than we might have thought. But let's remember, that wasn't even a 4th down play. So, that would have been 3rd down. So even if they had not had a review. And also, by good fortune, just want to say, how many times have you seen goal line plays where everybody's stacked up and there's no view of the ball whatsoever? So it just happens to be a really beneficial thing to us that we all saw it. It was clear. Even the announcers, both Herbstreit and Fowler on the broadcast, were like, "That's a touchdown. This is delayed." I love Fowler saying, "This is just delayed agony for 100 and something thousand here in Tennessee," and I think it was. Another quick observation or two before I wrap up. If you watch Game Day, or for those of you who win attending Game Day, first of all, and I'm not trying to rip Georgia, the Dawg Nation out there, but this was the first time I had noticed a big game on the road that we didn't seem to have that overwhelming presence. I didn't really see, there was a few fans in some red jerseys and shirts scattered in the Game Day crowd. I watched all or most of Game Day, and I did not see a lot of Georgia fans in the crowd. It was definitely a big Tennessee takeover. Now, I know there was something funny about people camped out to be there, and they threw everybody off, then they moved everybody on. The Game Day guys talked about that. I don't know what all happened. So maybe there's a reason why the Georgia fans just didn't even have the option, didn't know what the rules were, and it sounds like they changed it, and Tennessee's fans sort of forced the issue, and they had a huge crowd, but it was really all very Tennessee. And that was surprising a little bit. Georgia fans have really traveled big over the last few years. And in the stands, I mean, there was obviously a nice chunk in the one corner where you saw the creamsicle and orange, or the creamsicle checkerboard out there, white and orange creamsicle, road crew orange. But there was the corner of the Georgia fans and wearing nice red that was breaking up the checkerboard, and that was nice. But I didn't see that sense. Now, again, a lot of the takeover happens when it helps when the other fans have a certain apathy. So as the SEC Shorts people made the fantastic video years ago when we made the trip to Notre Dame about all the Rudy style video of all the people turning in their tickets so Georgia fans could get to go to the game. You were only granted 10,000 tickets or whatever it is as the away team. So our ability to get in the stadium requires that Tennessee fans sell their tickets. Now, there's always a certain amount of trading going on StubHub and SeatGeek and those places and Ticketmaster, and you can't stop that. You can't generally prevent, say, oh, well, I'm only selling this ticket to a Tennessee fan. I mean, I guess you could try. But generally speaking, if Georgia fans wanted to pay whatever the going rate was and get in, then they would have. And look, I understand it. I'm not trying to rip you guys. I'm just making the observation. This is observation day still. So observation is we didn't have fans who were paying whatever it took to get into that stadium in big numbers. We had a normal away contingent. And that's what you saw. You didn't hear a takeover. You didn't see a takeover. You didn't see just red everywhere. And, that's fair. They were more hyped up for this game. It meant more to them than to us. And let's face it, the Georgia fan base has had to shell out a ton of money in recent years to be a part of big games, okay? Especially when you get to these playoffs. You go to the SEC championship game, then you go to 2 playoff games. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I am not ripping you guys out there. I'm not ripping all of us. I'm just making the observation that this is something that's happening as our program matures, is that you don't see a desperate effort to fill out a stadium in a regular season game against a rival that we've beaten 8 times in a row anymore. This game meant a lot to us, but it obviously meant a lot more to Tennessee. Although here's the other interesting observation. On game day, if you watch game day or if you were there, the Tennessee fans still reserve, no matter the fact that we have this now 9-game win streak against them, the Tennessee fans clearly reserve their largest amount of hate and frustration and aggravation for their rivalry, the third Saturday in October rivalry with Alabama. Because during the broadcast, when Florida State was brought up and they were talking Alabama, and this started largely when they brought on Kalen DeBoer he did an on-field interview on game day. And they were talking to him on field, and the whole time they were talking to him, fans in the game day crowd behind the game day crew started chanting the Braves and FSU war chant, the chop. So they were doing the chant, and really every time Alabama was mentioned or it was relevant, the crowd of thousands of Tennessee fans broke into the FSU chant. They were just mocking and taunting Alabama at every chance they had. So, and I thought that was a really interesting thing. I just want to make that observation because here they are, they have game day. This is a top 15 matchup on campus. They have beaten out. Now they had a 16-game losing streak against Alabama until they won that game in 2022 and threw the goalpost in the river. But so, I mean, they're frustrated, and Alabama is their bigger rival. Okay. Like we've talked about, we went all through the history and stuff, but I think that it was really interesting to note where this game sat for them. And I think we're seeing that coming after that. I've seen several articles and things basically saying, well, Tennessee will be fine. And from Tennessee fans saying this really hurt and it was egregious. And there was a lot of, obviously, you saw just, fans that just couldn't believe what happened to them after the way they'd stormed out and had the big lead in that game. But there's several articles talk about, look, they filed out quietly. It was a somber mood, but, they didn't go out and just weeping and gnashing of teeth, ripping their clothes off and wailing and screaming on the ground, and I think that the pregame and the postgame shows that while this game mattered a lot to them, it didn't matter everything to them. They would they were still taunting Alabama in the pregame in game day, not us. And they have the advantage of saying, look, they lost this game last year and worse than this year. They got beat worse when they came to Athens last year. It was later in the season, and they still made the playoff. So, losing this game doesn't necessarily mean their season is over. In fact, again, another interesting or odd observation of this game, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, I just want to emphasize it again. I think both teams come out ahead in this game. This is one of those rare games where it was such a good game, the national audience and everybody liked it so much, and it raised the stature of both teams. People came into this game saying, look, Georgia's obviously talented, but I don't know if they've got a quarterback and an offense that could carry them through every game they're going to have to get through to win a national championship. They saw what Gunner did, SEC Offensive Player of the Week, and they said, hey, that guy can do it. Doesn't mean he's going to do it every time. Doesn't mean he's the greatest quarterback in the history of Georgia football or the SEC. But it means if he could do it once, he could do it another time. If he could do it any times, then he's good enough to do it. So it's another answer to that question we've been talking about so far all season. Do we have the clubs in our bag? Do we have the tools in our toolkit to, compared to the other teams out there, do what's necessary to win a national championship, compete for a national championship? And now people say, yeah, I thought Georgia was probably the fifth or so most talented team in the country, and now I know they got a quarterback good enough to win a game against anybody. Doesn't mean he'll do it every time, but they can. And so we didn't move up hugely in stature, but most people were still, like I said, about fifth in most of everybody's estimations right now at this point in the season. But everybody I'm seeing is saying, I didn't know if they had what it took to really be a contender. I know they are a contender. So they're still fifth, but we're a contender. Tennessee, though, came into this being like, look, everybody thought what we talked about. They got a bunch of receivers. They replaced their whole receiving core, mostly with guys that were not as heralded as the guys before them. They lost a huge NFL-worthy running back, and they brought in a transfer from Duke as the main replacement to that. They brought in a transfer from App State. I mean, he did come by way of UCLA, but he didn't even have a cup of coffee there. He just went through there. It was like a plane transfer, right? Like he landed there briefly on his connecting flight back to Tennessee. And so he really went from App State to Tennessee, and you don't think of like, hey, what a championship or a playoff contending team or an important team from the SEC, the way they're going to get better is go get the quarterback from App State. That's how you're going to win the SEC or compete in the SEC. Nobody would have thought that. So everybody took them down a notch, and now everybody's saying, hey, this team performed the best against a Kirby Smart Georgia team of any Tennessee team in recorded memory. So now everybody's looking at this Tennessee team again. They were 15th. They're still 15th in the poll. And most people actually have more of a sense that could be a playoff team now than they thought coming into the season. I've referenced Phil Still before. I look at his work a lot. I'll say that he thought coming into the season, I want to give him credit, he thought that Tennessee was a potential playoff team. And I am now going to put them, when we look at our list of teams that are playoff teams and games we have to consider, I'm moving them into that category too. So I think this is a game where, oddly enough, I guess one of the key observations here then is both teams win. Georgia won the game, but both teams came out of this game, and you would have thought Tennessee losing again, they say, same old Tennessee. No, their stature came up. People say, hey, they are the 15th best team in the country. They didn't just get there because somebody had to be. They are. And that means they're probably a playoff contender. They're right on that edge of playoff contention. Georgia isn't just the fifth best team on talent. They've got the pieces that they could win a national championship. They are a national championship SEC contender. And, you would have thought us fumbling around and giving Tennessee the chance to have 41 points on the board and barely beating them coming into the game. If you told me we were going to get torched and give up almost 500 yards of offense, I would have thought, then people are going to think we're toast. No, more people have a better appreciation of Georgia after this game than before it. More people have a better appreciation of Tennessee after this game than before it. So that's pretty amazing. Our defense did some great things. Our offense showed us that it could be a great offense. Anytime you put up 500 yards against an SEC defense, then you got something to work with. So we're going to continue to break that down. Our downfield receivers did a great job. They made plays happen, and they forced penalties, and they did a good job. The running game was very effective going back to that, 170 yards in regulation, almost 200 total. The one thing I would gripe about is that is only about 3.6 yard per carry average, which is not good enough. You want to see that even in an SEC game be at least 4.5, maybe 5. Throughout the season, the great teams that just ran the ball when they needed to and had to and took the will out of other teams, 2021, 2022 teams, even 2023, your top ball carriers averaged 5+ 6 yards a carry, and as a team we averaged 5 yards a carry or more. So I appreciate that we did enough and we stuck with the run enough. And like I said, we made up those margins we'd lost in the last couple of years. More yards on offense, less yards on defense on the run game. And I think that made the difference. And it made a huge difference. One of the things we talked about coming into this game was time of possession. And I still think, while I'm giving Heupel's offense a lot more credit, they ground the ball at us in the second, late in the game, and could have won the game if they'd made the field goal by grinding the ball out on the run. But for most of the game, the lack of the run, especially in the middle of the game, after they'd already hit their big hitters, did what we talked about. It put them in a position where we just had the ball so much more. We ran 87 plays to their 70. They'd been averaging nearly 100 plays a game or something like that coming in. And we were averaging 76 plays a game on offense and 50 or so on defense. So their defense was out there 87 plays in this game. We had 87 offensive plays. So we exceeded our offense. We had the ball 38 minutes in this game. They had it like 22 minutes. So that is a huge, we had almost 30, it was actually over almost 38 and a half, and to their 21 and a half. So I still think that their ability to hit those 50-50 big hitters really was a huge difference in the game. Had they not hit those, it might have been a totally different game. But they did, and it's to their credit. It's not fluky. They take them. They've hit those shots against other teams. They usually don't against us, but they did this time. And it's to their credit. We're not knocking them for that. But we could have defended them. We had people in position, and had they not got them, it would have changed the nature of the game. But in the end, one of the things we did talk about coming into this game last week, coming in, was that their offense, I'm backtracking a little bit. So our closing perspective is, look, their offense that I called a little gimmicky, I think it was more flexible than I would have thought. They hit the big hitters, and at the end of the game, they almost won the game by running it down our throat. In the middle of the game, though, they couldn't run, and for most of the game, their inability to run is what, when they were missing on passes, then they had nothing. And overall, they only had the one possession in the whole game that they used 3 minutes or more. All of their other possessions, these are their possessions: 2 minutes 30 seconds, 2 minutes 29, 121, 222, 40 seconds, 117, 45 seconds, 138, 116, 141, 229. Those score or not, those are their possessions. They had 504. Our possessions, we had, here's one, 339, 312. So 312 is a punt, 339 is a touchdown, 615 field goal, 741 touchdown. Here's a 408 touchdown. We possessed the ball. We had more opportunity with the ball. We had more plays. We had 17 more plays with them. We had the ball 38 minutes to their 22, 16 minutes more. We had the ball. Those opportunities gave us the chance to keep finding a way to win this game, continuing to coach and execute well, and the team continuing. Also, let's just go back and say the resiliency is also something that we have to, every team needs an identity, and it feels like the last year or two, maybe the Georgia team didn't have an identity. This team feels like it has that gritty, fight hard, won't give up, can't put us down identity. And I think that having an identity will continue to serve this team going forward. So, kudos to Tennessee. I think they're going to be a part of the discussion going on. They may be more significant than we thought. Kudos to Georgia for winning the game. I also wanted to make the observation and note, you might have noticed a lot of the history. If you saw the beginning of the game, the early broadcast, a lot of the history that I talked about, they really wanted to hype up the game and give you as much context. So they gave you a lot of that same history. They talked about how Tennessee won 9 in a row, and then how we turned it around and we'd won 8 in a row. They talked about how it wasn't a very often played rivalry. They kind of hit all the same stuff. So I hope you enjoyed knowing that. And if you didn't know that before I shared it with you, maybe you noted. Maybe you knew it before I shared it with you. I don't want to assume you don't know these things. Again, what I'm trying to do here is broaden the conversation. Some of the things I'm doing, I repeat some of the things that other people have said, but a lot of it is, look, we want to have good, long, and intelligent and lasting conversations about this. We're investing in these 12 weeks a year that we know we get to watch Georgia football, hopefully more when we do go to the SEC championship and playoffs. But the season is short and we want to enjoy it. And so I'm encouraging you to find and read and listen to the other people out there. I'm not asking you to be here exclusively with me. What I'm hoping is that this is sort of that conversation that, once a day you sit down and you're like, this is the part of the day I look forward to, where I'm going to sit down and just talk Georgia football with my good friend. And that's what I'm trying to make these conversations to be, that style, where we are acknowledging there's other people out there saying stuff and talking about Georgia football, but we're talking about it. What'd you think about what so-and-so said? To that end, let me encourage you or remind you, please join in. You can send me messages on Facebook or Instagram. You can send messages. You can go to thedailydawg.com and you can email us at thedailydawg.com. You can join the chat. There's an open chat, which is free. You have to scan into it, but once you're in it, anybody can join it. You can make comments on the podcast themselves in the comment section. So any way you can, please feel free to share with us. We want to hear from you. So, and I will include commentary from you guys out there in these podcasts. So again, today was yet another day of just enjoying and digging into how much what all went on in that amazing game. We've got some extra time to just keep thinking about this game and enjoying it and having fun with it, because it is the off week. So this is our off week coverage. We will eventually start breaking down and look at Alabama. We got all of next week to do that too. So we got some more history and perspective to cover, and I'm happy to cover some more things that you want to do if you'll, again, share with me some comments and ideas about that. So listen, I'm having a great time. I hope you're enjoying these podcasts. I know they keep getting a little longer, and each time I'm trying to make them shorter and limit what we're talking about. And I wouldn't mind hearing from you guys on that too. What is the ideal length for these? You may have noticed I changed the nomenclature. Again, I was at the beginning, I was saying, I started calling these, I had it as the Daily Dawg podcast and it's game week number 1, 2, 3. I'm not sure that game week idea makes any sense. It makes the title very long. This week I started using 2504, which means this is the 2025 season, week 4. And this is week 4 and it's our off week. So next week when we get to week 5, it'll be 2505 and it'll be Alabama week. And I think instead of calling it game week 5, we're going to say this is Alabama week. And, each week we'll focus on that. Unfortunately, I changed this week to this opponent, and it's not an easy, obvious thing because it's just off week. So that's what this is. This is off week, right? So this is your Tuesday podcast for the 2025 Georgia football season, week 4, which is our off week. I hope you've had a good time, and I hope you'll be back and enjoy more discussion with us tomorrow. And what we say here at the end. We've been saying it every time. It's the only way Bulldogs can start and finish any good conversation. Go Dogs.